With the release of Star Wars Revan, I wanted to do a little sort of making of type video to show how I made the movie and also to chronicle the very long and very complex production of the project. So, the story starts in late 2017. I'd read Drew Karpyshyn's novel, also called Revan, over the summer. So that was rattling away in the back of my head when I acquired Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic and its sequel on PC around mid-October of that year. And when I discovered that you could enter a first-person camera mode by pressing caps lock, I kind of immediately wanted to use the two KOTOR games for a machinima. However, several problems were quite immediately apparent. Firstly, there's the issue of staging. While you're in the first person camera view, you can't move, which means you're basically completely stationary. You can only look from side to side, and your vertical view field is very limited. You're also automatically taken out of the camera view if the character you're controlling is anywhere near combat. This is far too restrictive. So I did a bit of digging, and I don't remember exactly how or where I stumbled across it, but I discovered a piece of software called Glintercept, G-L-Intercept, however it's pronounced. This nifty little piece of software allows you to sort of fly around the map using a fully controllable free-moving camera, which came in very, very handy indeed. So now I have a camera set up. Go into the first person camera mode using caps lock to disable the heads up display and all the other on-screen elements, and then, using the intercept, adjust the camera accordingly to where I wanted it to be. This means that I could have virtually any angle I wanted, which was a new experience to me considering almost all of my previous work up until now has been in the Destiny series of games, where you can only change camera angles by crouching. Camera setup complete, my next task was to write the script. This was the easiest process in the entire production by far, because I already had source material to work with, namely Drew Karpyshyn's novel. My first draft of the script was a pretty straightforward adaptation, with the only differences being some major cutting and editing on my part. One of the biggest changes I made was significantly trimming one of the subplots involving Revan and Canderous on Rekiad meeting up with Canderous' old clan, and then they hang out together and eat food and make a big long trek up a mountain icicle thing, and there's a big battle involving basilisk war droids, and I cut all that out for two reasons. One, it's not massively integral to the plot and mostly just serves to give Canderous some extra backstory, which I consider fairly extraneous. And two, it would be nigh on impossible to stage. You've got to figure out how to properly represent basilisk war droids and the Mandalorian clan, and then the climate itself and Revan's fighting, which is made even more difficult by the fact that there's only one sort of properly snowy location in either of the two KOTOR games, and it's the Polar Plateau on Telos. So I just decided to cut all that. A kind of similar situation played out with the character of Seshul. In the novel, Seshul is a slimy, quite nasty character who's sent by Darth Nihilus to essentially follow Scourge around wherever he goes, and the two develop quite a rivalry. The main problems with Seshul is that he has to go everywhere Scourge goes, including combat zones in the droid factory, which would just add a whole mountain of problems. He doesn't serve much of a purpose other than to be a foil to Scourge, and he is supremely annoying. I cut him out of Scourge's missions, but I did keep him on as a Rodian informant who tells Mitra Surik where to find Scourge, who then threatens Seshul for dirt on Nihilus. Seshul does tell Surik that he and Scourge have a history, so there are hints of their rivalry there. I just elected not to show it on screen. Aside from these cuts, the rest of the movie is mostly faithful to the novel. However, the script would, over the course of the next almost 3 years, be rewritten and revised constantly, which would slowly cause the script to drift away from the source material. The very first scene, for example, with Scourge and the Emperor, was my own invention, and it was added to give the Emperor a little bit more presence at the start of the film, as well as make it clear that the Emperor is aware of Revan's return, or of Revan being alive. I also tweaked much of the dialogue, which altered some minor plot points, such as Bastila becoming a Jedi Council member, for example. I also changed the ending. The novel ends with Bastila talking to Revan's son, Vaynor, not the best name ever, which I kind of replaced with Revan imprisoned, delivering a monologue. This refocuses the movie on Revan, and it also makes it clear what his condition is, whether he's alive or dead. Answer is he's alive, but, mentally he's bonded to the Emperor, which isn't good. So, script in hand, I decided to start shooting. This was around the start of November 2017. The first scene I ever tried to shoot was one of the scenes with Candace and Revan in the bar. However, there was a major issue. My laptop wasn't powerful enough to actually record the footage of the game without lagging horribly. I tried everything I could think of, task manager, clearing my cache, restarting my computer, but nothing kind of solved the problem. The footage would always have a frame rate of at most 5 frames per second. Most films have a frame rate of 30 frames per second, so having a sixth of the frame rate is obviously not going to be very good. So given the problems with the frame rate that I was having, I decided to put the project on ice until further notice. I hadn't really told anyone about the project because I wasn't sure if I'd actually be able to make it, so it wasn't a big deal to wait until I could actually start shooting. And lo and behold, by April of 2019 I had a brand new computer which could record Quarter 2 smoothly and properly, with no lag. This is when production truly began. My plan for the production was as follows. Because I had essentially no idea what I was doing, and I knew that I had no idea what I was doing, I decided not to cast the project until I had all of the footage completely shot. To that end, the first thing I did was do a reading of the script in my own voice so I had something to edit to. You can't check if you've kind of shot everything if you can't put it all together and assemble it into a rough draft, after all. You look terrible. Been a catalyst for the war? This have anything to do with those bad dreams you mentioned? It might. Your memory is followers. If I can find it again, I might discover some clues, but I can't remember where it is. I need you to talk to some of your fellow Mandalorians. Find out what they know. After that, I split the movie up into 32 scenes and 3 acts. The reason I sectioned the movie up this way was to make it manageable and easy to track my progress in certain increments. Talking of tracking, one of the most important documents in any project is a schedule, to keep an exact record of what scenes you've shot and what voice lines you've received. It's very important to be organised, because if you're not organised, then you waste a ton of time trying to find files that you don't even know if you have or not. Anyways, on to the shooting. Most of the dialogue scenes were pretty straightforward enough. Position the characters into correct position using the game's solo mode, and then set up the camera character in a position where they're not visible in the frame. If there's more than 2 characters in a scene, as with a couple of scenes with T3M3 in them, I used a mod that allowed me to clone a party member, and then I would swap that party member out for a different party member, keeping the clone there. The way that character emotes or animations worked was that I would set them to activate via a modded item, accessed from the character in question's inventory. Then there'd be a sort of a reasonable pause of about 10 seconds or so, which allowed me to switch characters, go into first person and position my camera, although I almost always had the camera pre-positioned so that I wouldn't miss the start of the animation fiddling with the shot. However, there were limitations. Animations that looped, for example, Scourge being choked by the Emperor, and even more mundane examples like Bastila sitting down or Revan meditating, lasted for 1 minute exactly. There was no way to alter this timer that I could find. This meant that after every minute, or more accurately after every sort of 55 seconds of shooting, I had to pull myself out of camera mode, switch to the character that was doing the animation, have them activate the animation, switch back to my camera, and then go back into camera mode and possibly reposition the camera. It made what should have been otherwise uncomplicated discussion scenes, like the scene between Bastila and Mitra Surik, a lot more onerous to film, which in part contributed to the ungodly levels of careful positioning and staging which made the shooting of the movie take forever. Another factor of the movie taking forever was that I was multitasking. I was working on both the Revan movie and my main Destiny Machinima projects at the same time. That being said, nothing was quite as messy, as arduous, as time consuming and as generally hellish as the fight scenes. There are 3 proper fight scenes in the movie: Scourge's duel with Darth Zedrix, the showdown at Nidus' fortress, and the final fight with the Emperor. Each of these fights were shot in almost the exact same way, just with progressively more fighters. First things first, having the camera character be anywhere near the combat would force you into combat, and thus pull you out of the camera mode. Therefore, the camera character needed to be stashed far away from the action, whereas in a discussion scene the camera can be absolutely anywhere so long as they're hidden by the framing. Secondly, you can't really have your teammates, i.e. the people actually doing the fighting, in your party. This is because right at the start and end of any combat your teammates are involved in, the game will pull your camera character out of camera mode regardless of how far away you are from the action. Therefore, all the fight scenes were shot almost entirely with cloned characters in an empty party, aside from the character camera, of course. The second issue is longevity. The first time I tried to record the Nidus showdown, Scourge died in a single hit. This meant I had to go back and use a save game editor to tweak the attributes of all of the characters to ensure they'd last a good while in a fight. So, increase dexterity and constitution, decrease strength. After that, it was just a matter of setting up the clones, turning the nearest enemy, almost always the villain of the fight, to hostile using another modded item, then letting my camera capture footage as required. I shot a lot of footage for each fight, and I had to reshoot the Nidus showdown because of some sound issues. In my first draft cut, the one with my vocals on it, the fight scenes were uniformly much longer, which I cut down in the final draft because as much as I like lightsaber duels, the fights were just far too long. Once I had all of the footage shot and edited to my voice, I put together the casting call for the movie. I'd anticipated that because Star Wars is Star Wars and Star Wars is popular, I'd get slightly more auditions than normal, but the sheer volume of auditions was quite staggering. I got 92 auditions. For reference, the most auditions I'd ever gotten for a project previous to that was 32. This meant I had a plethora of choices with regards to most of the roles, and many of the auditions were incredibly good. I didn't have to worry about harsh noise reduction or tinny microphones or popping and blasting or any of the usual technical issues that sometimes crop up in auditions. Once I'd cast my characters, I started receiving voice lines, some within mere hours after I'd cast them, which meant that I could then start piecing the film together properly. I'd edited my rough draft in Windows Movie Maker, but by the time I'd started receiving voice lines, I'd switched to using Adobe Premiere Pro for all of my projects. However, given that I already had the video edited in sequence in the Movie Maker files, I decided to render each individual scene in Movie Maker and then assemble the finished scenes in Premiere Pro. Unfortunately, Windows Movie Maker is not a good editing software, and sometimes frame glitches occur. A frame glitch is when the final video file includes frames that were cut off in the Movie Maker file. This is especially problematic when you're cutting scenes very finely. For example, leaving in one more frame would result in the UI being visible briefly on the screen, which would cause a nasty jarring effect. This meant that I had to go through all the video files in Premiere Pro and trim out any glitches that were present, since Premiere Pro, being a proper professional video editing software, does not have such frame glitches. After this, it was on to the music editing. Almost the entire movie is scored, and the music, with 2 exceptions, came from 3 sources, and 3 sources only. The soundtracks for the 2 Quarter games, the soundtracks for the 2 Force Unleashed games, and the soundtrack to Jedi Fallen Order. The 2 pieces of music that broke this rule was the iconic intro theme and the operatic theme that plays over much of the Emperor duel. I selected, added, edited and mixed the music in the span of a single day, which was Sunday the 13th of September. The following 4 days were spent watching the movie in full and making notes of any changes that needed to be made. Even this late in the editing process, I was constantly going back to Quarter 2 and grabbing pickup shots, which were needed for a variety of reasons. Some scenes didn't have establishing shots, some shots were held for too long because the voice actors delivered their lines slower than I did, and some shots needed additional inserts to make the scene run smoothly. This was also the point at which I added most of the sound effects. Almost all of the fight scenes have synced sound, with the exception of the Zedrix fight, where some of the lightsabers are overdubbed due to clipping issues, but most of the sounds outside of the fight scenes, doors opening, lightsabers activating, ships crashing, etc., are dubbed. Finally, by Thursday the 17th of September, I had a cut of the film that I was happy with. It's not perfect. There are shots that could have been framed slightly better, the pacing could have been tightened slightly, but on the whole, I was pleased. Looking back, it feels like 3 years was almost too long to spend in a project like this, but on the other hand, the sheer amount of work that went into it was monumental, and a lot of it, such as researching mods, fiddling with character appearances and attributes and sound design and so on, isn't readily apparent or obvious when you first watch the movie. As for the possibility of a sequel, well, Revan's story is far from over, and the Emperor's has only just begun. However, I feel like I've exhausted KOTOR 2. There's very little in terms of locations, characters, and technical innovations that I haven't already explored. If there is going to be a follow-up, and that is quite a big if, it'll almost certainly use another vehicle for telling Revan's story, another game, in other words. What that game might be, and what form that sequel might take, and even if there will be a sequel, are questions I can't answer. But for now, Revan lives on, suspended between life and death.